Everybody, can everybody hear the my voice okay? If audio is good, cool. Welcome to the 34th edition of the Haunted Hacker podcast. Tonight's kind of special. We have two guests. We have Kee Jefferys, who is a CTO for a blockchain company. And then we have my first boss when I got out of the military, Jim, who we're going to get to him here shortly. We'll do his first, and then we'll jump to Kee and go from there. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just to remind everybody that this is picked up by H4unt3d and aired 3 times a week on their Digital Anarchy show. I'm going to shut the chat off once we get started so there's no disruptions, and save your questions. When you enter them into the chat, it'll come straight to me, and I'll field them as we go. As far as news go, we have some really cool news. We are at 400 subscribers on YouTube now. So I put up a arcade cabinet, the Haunted Hacker arcade cabinet, free to the 500 subscriber. So whoever hits that 500 mark will get one of the Haunted Hacker arcade cabinets. Also, we've been mixing music. Me and Ryan got like 3 or 4 tracks now. The goal is to complete an album before October and air that on the 1-year anniversary of the podcast. Also this week on the 30th, the 30th, I'm speaking with Kevin Mitnick and some people from Microsoft and Palo Alto on Rubrik's, webinar kind of podcast deal. Did the recording for it last week. So it's going to be live on the 30th, and I'll send out a link to that into Discord as well as LinkedIn, just to remind everybody. And I'm going to be on a couple different podcasts coming up, a couple different shows, one of them possibly being a TV show. So we'll see how that goes. So that's it. I want to introduce a guy who had a huge impact on me when I got out of the military. He worked at a very big ISP and was building a global security operations center. I moved across the country from Virginia to start work there, and that really launched my career into cybersecurity. I've been working as a analyst and a C&D cell operator for USGFCom as a contractor, but it's a little bit different in the military and as a DoD contractor than it is in the real world. I got to see a lot of action at USGFCom, a lot of really architected attacks and some really cool stuff. But helping build a SOC and looking at different data feeds was a different type of feeling for me. It really got me into the nuts and bolts of how security really works. So without any further ado, Jim, why don't you introduce yourself and give people kind of a background on what you do and where you came from.
Hey, Mike, you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So honored to meet everyone here. Mike has been, we've been one of those perfect examples of networking for a long time. But I got my start started out in Tampa, Florida, which is where my family is from, and started in retail and IT. And when they had a store called the Software Store down in Tampa, and no, we didn't sell underwear, though we got those calls. But really, when it was back in '82, and a couple of years later, I had the opportunity where they were doing a kind of a yin and yang kind of television show for, on one side was this teenager, meaning me. Why do teenagers break into things? The word hacker, of course, was used. And then on the other side was a fraud investigator that worked for the company that I eventually worked for. He worked for where my dad had worked. And so I got on there and got interviewed by a television reporter lady, and it was like, Dad, I want to do what he does. And fate, trust, blessings, whatever you want to call it. In 1994, I was doing some technical support, call it the help desk, et cetera. And security guy walked across the hallway and said, Jim, you want a job in security? And I was like, how fast do I sign? And of course, that was in September of '94 with a company y'all may know as GTE, now is what we call Verizon, and at their data center. And sure, signed up. And about 3 months later, they came and said, we're doing a reorg, which reorg at that early in your career means synergies, means you're low man on the totem pole. And overwhelmingly blessed by the guy that was going to be my new boss walks in the door in January, and it was the guy from the television show 10 years prior.
That's pretty amazing.
So pretty overwhelming. Didn't know it at the time, but from there started building user IDs on Unix boxes. And as Bill Gates says, if you want to improve a process, give it to a lazy person. I was that lazy person. And so learned shell scripting very quickly because they were doing 85 different steps to build a Unix ID. And that was just going to drive me nuts. And then in '95, we had a very large a breach that was started from overseas. And of all things, and I will tell you that in my time of mentoring people wanting to get into the security field, I want you to hear this. That entire breach did not happen over that thing called an IP network. It originated over something called an X.25 network. And if you think that X.25 networks are dead or they are no longer used by bad guys, you would be unwise. And so we were looking at logs. We literally unplugged a Cat5 cable, and we still were chatting with said bad guy. And we were like, what the heck's going on? And the only cable that was still plugged in was an X.25 printer cable. And so there was my exposure to, I'll say what the media calls it today, the malicious hacker. Now, I have a long story with that story goes on for a long time. And it was an interesting experience of understanding the views of people that were creative. Unfortunately, they stepped over a line that they shouldn't have, but it was an interesting experience. And so that's where I got my start. And I took a path. So that was 27 years ago, if you do the math. I then took a path of what's in the industry calls converged security, which is started a little bit in this thing called cyber or information security back then. And now I've pretty much, I think, done pretty much anything that's in kind of a classic corporate security. I don't have a military background. I do pretty much all of my mentoring is in military people that are transitioning or law enforcement. My wife was former law enforcement. But I've done physical security, cybersecurity, kinetic red teaming, cyber red teaming, executive protection, et cetera. So the full gamut. And thus, when I mentor and get the question of, hey, I want to get into security, I have the honor to be able to and blessed to be able to cover all the areas of this term called security. And I don't think about a lot about how they talk about it in academia, which is okay. I talk about it as an operational person for the last 27 years. And so truly blessed, Mike, to have an incredible network and more mentors than I deserve. And just being able to give back now, and as you do. And so honored to be here, Mike, and honored to help your crew here and answer any questions and step through some what themes you'd like to see. I'm strong on LinkedIn, folks, so that's kind of the place that I play. My blogging is on there, and I'm always open to the appropriate level of connections on LinkedIn. But again, Mike, honored to be with you again.
Absolutely, I appreciate it, Jim. Yeah, when I went to work for Verizon, it was really an interesting time for me, and especially for the GSOC in general. We were bringing in a couple platforms that were pretty new to cybersecurity and very complex. Multiple data feeds, multiple sources and buckets and containers, and just a massive amount of work. But we did have a lot of fun. We took a class on getting certified. One of my certifications for a platform that we brought into the company. And I still remember taking that class in the GSOC, and everybody came in, all shifts came in, and they had all these Linux servers sitting on the desk and running the platform. Well, I realized really quick that SSH was open on all the platforms, and they had really weak passwords. So I was like scanning the network and messing with the boxes and rebooting people's boxes. And we had a guy named Ron. Um, Ron and I used to tease each other a lot, and I would constantly reboot his box. But we had a lot of fun. I taught a couple guys how to pen test and run exploits on our spare time. One of them I'm still really good friends with, Rich Desai. He and I have been friends for a very long time, and we worked the night shift together. And I taught him how to pen test and how exploits work. And instead of seeing what's on the screen and looking at alerts, he was the first person I mentored to show him what generates those alerts and why those alerts are so important and what they flag on. And that's kind of what I do now is try to teach people both sides of the security equation, because to me, if you just learn the defensive side, you can't be completely proficient. Sun Tzu said it best when he said, to beat your enemy, you have to become your enemy. You have to know your enemy. So that's what I've done my entire life. So yeah, the mentoring is really important. I am walking into a company on Monday, taking on a team of 16 people for the first time. Um, I've never had a pre-built team. I've always had to build teams from the ground up. So this should be really interesting, but it's an opportunity to work with a gentleman who I've looked up to my whole entire career, and finally getting a chance to sit down with him and build something really cool. I'll be working remote as a SOC manager for a while, and taking that to the next level, hopefully. Along with what we do here, this is really, the haunted hacker movement was more of a mentorship type, movement for transmitting information and knowledge. That knowledge transfer is really important. And I don't believe in charging for that. However, we are getting to a point in this group where we are moving some stuff to subscription level because it's growing very fast. So yeah, I've really, working for you, Jim, it really taught me a lot. I remember you used to walk into the GSOC and talk to everybody, and that's really rare, especially for VPs and people on that level to, come and spend time with their people. We had some really good people there, and it was a really good group. And I still keep in touch with a lot of them. So, Jim, what would you say is the biggest dilemma when it comes to running an organization like that? What was the hardest part for you?
Yeah, and obviously I'll respect our lawyers for a second. I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer and all that other stuff, so we'll get that out of the way. But they've blessed me and my family. My family's got 90 years with them, so they're absolutely a blessing, and they are the reason I'm here. But Mike, when I start to talk about organizational design now, and from a security perspective, whether it's a classic just cyber information security to a kinetic physical security to a combination thereof. You know, it's um, one of the things I've realized is that, and I made the mistake at the GSOC and other places, is I hired. It sounds funny, but I hired way too many technical people. I realized recently that there's so much other skill sets. Mike, you've seen my mind map. Honored to go through that at some point with your team here or later. But when I realized in that mind mapping, what do we need in a security department? We meaning any organization. And by the way, I had the privilege of doing pro bono work for about 300 faith-based organizations. And when I'm talking to a pastor or seminary, whatever level that they are, I have the same conversations. And so one of the things in the security world is we forgot to hire a marketing person. We got to hire a documentation person. Forgot to hire a quality assurance person. And the GSOC, we started to do some of that. Um, but I realized that we were hiring from skill sets that were like us, both psychologically, technically, and otherwise. And that was okay when it was three people in a closet, which, by the way, that's where we started. That was okay. But boy, we didn't hire people that challenged us in non-technical areas, because nobody could challenge us technically, best of the best. Um, but boy, when we sit there and said, you know what, guys, this document is going to get thrown back if we send it up to a CEO. And we're like, why? Because the colors are off. In all respect to the females on this call, I'm not a color guy. When I do analytics, I'm like, hey, is there a female in here? Tell me my colors are right or wrong type thing. And so something as simple as, what's the skill set of the people? The other thing that I realized is that um, I didn't hire enough business people. In other words, people that kind of knew what the company did for a living and kind of what was normal and weird. Because we would see something and go, "Oh, that's just that," and people like, "Oh crap, how did you get a hold of that? What is that a problem?" Or, "Hey, look at this," and they're like, "Yeah, it's been that way for 150 years. People, get over it." And so it's that it's the technical side's easy. I'm blessed with lots of certifications. I've helped write some of the industry certifications. They're extremely valuable. But wow, when I didn't see PMPs or Mike, I don't know if you remember her name, a lady named Maria. Maria's was our documentation person. She was a Mensa, folks, a freaking Mensa. And guess what she brought to the table? Quality documentation, and not this thick garbage of saying, let's just have 50 policies to say we have 50 policies. She toned it down. She says, can we do this in 1 or 2 pages? And she really taught us some of those things. It's like, and what it really taught us, I think, a lot was, who's the customer of everything we do? I was a customer of Mike. Mike was a customer of mine. Even inside the organization, who was the customer? Because everything we did, whether it was a guy that did the back office management of the infrastructure, was a customer of the front line, and vice versa. No different than our boss, the finance department, the audit, whatever it is, everybody was a customer, everybody was a client. And when we thought about that, it was just, we have to produce an output, whether that's a requirement for Mike on the front line to be able to give back to the infrastructure for some analytical capabilities and say a database design, all the way to Mike producing some output that needs to go to a investigator or a lawyer or something like that. Mike, that's what we missed, was that non-technical side. So if anybody on this is listening to this and you think, I'm just not that technical person, think about the other skill sets that you have or you are passionate about. And let me tell you, I can find a place for you in a security organization.
Yeah, I think that's important. When I talk to people about coming on the show or becoming co-host, I always get, but I haven't been in the industry very long, or I don't have, that type of experience. My answer is always, I need that fresh view, that aspect, that look into the industry from a beginner or a newcomer's point of view, because sometimes I miss things. And with a fresh set of eyes that is completely new to the industry, hasn't seen the glitches or the hangups or the issues, it really helps. And asking questions from a newcomer's point of view is really informational as well. And it gives other people something to look at and say, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. And that was one thing I really respected about the GSOC, was the fact that we had so many diverse people. We had guys like Chris Hood and Jeff Sorrells, and Rich and all those guys, and they were all so different, but yet we were all still the same. And they were super heavy on tech. You're absolutely right with that. That was probably the most brain dump area that I've ever worked in. Like there was so much going on, and so many people with brilliant minds. Dr. John Moore, that worked with us. I still speak to him, and he was just absolutely phenomenal when it came to thinking about things from a different point of view. I worked with him on a couple supercomputing projects, like linking Sony PlayStations together and using them as a supercomputer. I learned so much, and not just from the job itself, but the people. And I think that's what the industry lacks a lot of right now, is we look at people as employees. We don't look at them as people. We're not interested in, their lives outside of work. So I try to encourage people, go to the different departments within your company, get a chance, talk to them, sit down with them. If you do have employees, sit down with them and get to know them, find out what they do outside of work, encourage that. And search is another important thing for me now at this level, at this point. I don't have room for certs. I have a ton of certs already. One of them, which was interesting, and I'm pretty sure you heard about this, Jim, the CEH, the EC Council debauchery and everything that was going on with them. It's unfortunate, but a couple of my certs were from them. And I think I actually took my CEH while I was working for you. The company paid for me to go take the test, and I passed that. So that was my very first certification outside of the military, which thank you for that, by the way. So yeah, like the industry as a whole, I think we're at a point now, after the lockdowns, we're all going back to work, where we're trying to get back into that mode of thinking, and that social I guess exchange inside the office. And like you said, it's very difficult when you have everybody who's super highly technical to be able to, sometimes it's hard for those people to get things done because they fight against their own brains. And I saw that on some of the shifts that I worked on. Was they had the right ideas, and another group had good ideas as well. But when you're dealing with people that are that intelligent, it's really hard to get those two people to see each other. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the way that you approach a situation. I was very young in my career, and probably not the best at getting people to work together or communicate, because I was still struggling with that myself. I have Asperger's, and learning how to communicate on that level has taken some time. And public speaking and podcasting and stuff like that has really helped. And that's another thing that you deal with in a diverse work situation, is you're going to run into people that have different diversities, whether it be neurodiverse or whatever. It's really important that my point, my whole motto when I go into an office is, I don't judge by someone's attitude, or I don't judge by something they say, because I don't know what's going on in their life. I don't know what's happened at home, and I don't know what they struggle with. And to me, it's really important to get to know those people and find out those struggles and those diversities. And that's one thing that the staff there, at the old company, was really good at doing. Jerry Lundy was one of the guys who gave me my first break, and I still talk to him every once in a while. Really great guy. But he was one of those ones who took the time to sit down and find out what made your brain tick. What did you have? What keys did you have that could unlock some doors to other experiences for other people? And that's a gift within itself. Being able to identify those skills and those assets is huge. And I think by, you'll hear people saying, well, I built this team and we did this and we did that and we did this great, but you hardly hear people say, we did it wrong. We could have done it better by doing this. Everybody wants to have that glory, hey, this is such a great thing and everything's flawless. Well, it's not like that, because you have to make mistakes in order to succeed. And I really appreciate that about you, Jim, is the fact that you're able to identify, some of the things that were challenges, and probably some of the things we fell short at, because that's definitely helped me, in my career. So I'm going to open up the questions while we're speaking. So if you guys want to pop in some questions in the chat, and I'll relay them to Jim. And also, we have a new co-host on. Speaking of new into the industry and not super deep and technical, but Ashley Eckert. She is a former Navy spook, like myself, a CT, and she's joining us tonight. Ashley, if you want to unmute and say hello, how are you?
Hi.
So this is her first night, and she'll be asking some questions from a fresh point of view. Ashley, do you have any questions for Jim while we're speaking about it?
Off the top of my head, no. Might have one in a few minutes. So. Okay,
excellent. All right, so
yeah. Mike, I also want to tell people that one of the other things that Mike's not giving resonance to the power of this GSOC was, most people don't know, it was one of the first insider threat SOCs in the world. People think of SOCs as a firewall SOC or an intrusion detection SOC, and all these other what we kind of used to call perimeter or intrusion type of SOC. It was actually one of the very first. It was insider threat. That was extremely new. We went to, before Mike joined, we went to probably 10 different companies trying to find somebody that had kind of done this, and nobody had ever done it in the industry. And we kept telling people, this is you're part of a program that has never been done for anywhere in the world. And by the way, we still talk about, I was just on a call this week with a Swedish customer, and we're still teaching people how to build insider threat socks in 2021. And so that was different. We get calls from, interesting agencies that we all know about, and they're going, we hear that term, and that's where we've learned a lot. So we were a perspective that nobody else had a perspective on. I mean, Dawn Capella with US Search, she defined the term insider threat. If you've never seen Dawn's work in that area, phenomenal work in that area. But boy, I mean, there's still people to this day, like I said, 5 days ago, going, how do you do insider threat? And so, Mike, that's, I think, a unique perspective that none of us do. We all came from this kind of what the industry said we were supposed to do. And by the way, folks, one of the things that we had a really fun time in there. Now, remember, we were a network company. 70% of the internet traffic ran across this particular company's network. But guess what? You know what the most despised term that we talked about a lot, because it was insider threat, was the term network security. Now we've got certifications in that, we got books on that, but let me challenge everybody. I'm a definitions guy, and I'll keep repeating that. But let me challenge everybody. And I love this statement from a lady that I was working an incident with. She says, networks were meant to pass traffic, not do security. Again, what a perspective. Now, do we need a secure network infrastructure? Absolutely. But just that perspective made you think out of the box. And little things that make you think out of the box was, Jim, what about network security? Be careful. For example, we used to see there was one incident where all of the equivalent IP addresses were all in uppercase. Like, oh, that's stupid. That must be just bad traffic. Well, actually, in the old telecommunications world, anytime you see all uppercase things in a field is really, really critical infrastructure. Okay. So it's all about perspective of when you go into and start working for a company, bring that new perspective and don't say, I know, but say, hey, raise that hand and say, can I just make an observation here? If anybody's never heard of Andy Andrews, go read Andy Andrews' books on perspective. He's not a technical guy. He's just a storyteller, but it's really around, learning what perspective you can bring to the table. Sorry, Mike.
That's fine. And you're right. The insider threat part, I skimmed over that, but that's definitely a really important part of that history. I had gone from USGFCOM, which was the backup to the Pentagon, in their C&D cell and their GCCC, Global Command and Control Center. We did the network security and infrastructure protection for the entire east coast of the fleet, including the Admiral. So we got to see some really interesting stuff. But the traffic that I saw there and the types of attacks were much different than the ones that I saw at the old company, because it was insider threat. And we dealt with several different business units spread out around the world. Some of them I still speak to and still do work for every once in a while. So yeah, it's a different view. And so far in the 20 years that I've been in this industry, I have not seen another insider threat SOC. I'm sure that maybe they exist, but so far I haven't seen any. So kudos, Jim, for being one of the first to build an insider threat SOC. So yeah, certs. Let's talk about certs for a second.
Sure.
I was a big proponent about certs when I first got into the industry because it was required to get a job. But what I quickly found was that some of the certs were kind of lackluster and probably not as deep technical as they probably should have been. I took a couple certs I challenged a couple tests from SANS. I think it was like 3 or 4 certs in one day. And if anybody has taken a SANS certification course, They run about $5,000. And I challenged 3 of the tests. I think it was for $300 because they don't expect you to be able to pass the test. Well, I passed the test, got my certs, and then I got a call from SANS saying, hey, we're going to put you before an audit committee because we want to make sure you didn't cheat. And I thought, oh, this is a money thing. It really is a money thing because I didn't pay the $5,000 per cert, immediately because I didn't take the class, then I'm suspect of cheating. Well, I didn't cheat, and they gave me my certs later, but it made me think about the way that we look at certs. They are a gauge of, foundational knowledge, but in another aspect, it's a business, and it truly is treated like a business. And we've seen some business failures recently from some of the certification companies. And Jim, we're actually with the Haunted Hacker Crew, we're actually producing our own certification. It's going to be an offensive certification. We're going to have kind of a battlefield that they can do capture the flag type exercises through range force, and we're writing our own documentation and testing material. So, and it's going to be one of those things where we're not going to be charging $2,000 per test or whatever. It's going to be a couple $100, and that's all you have to pay. Really, your time on the range, and that's it. And if you fulfill all the tasks, then you get your certification. And I think that's the way it should be. The OSCP is probably one of the better certs because it does have that hands-on aspect. And there's definitely some defensive certs out there as well that are really good. I don't have any of those. I probably should. But I also have the ArcSite administrator cert, and a couple others. So the certifications that I think are important are the hacking, the GCIH, which is the incident handling from SANS, and then also GHTQ, which is the cutting edge hacking techniques through SANS. So if any of you are looking to get certs, take a look at those. And if you have the chops, you have the technical chops, challenge that OSCP because I think that's going to become the industry standard before too long. So Ashley, do you have any certs? Were you working on any certs at the time?
Honestly, no. I had an interest, but I really haven't done much training, like in that area. Like I was a tech recruiter for a bit, and then crypto tech in the Navy, but besides that, not really a lot of experience.
Yeah, the crypto tech part of it is really important too, because we went through a lot of technical training as CTs. I think our training was 14 weeks, something like that. It was pretty long, and they shotgunned a lot of math and intelligence into a very short period of time. Jim, you're about to say something?
Yeah, and let me give you a view of everybody a view of certifications. So if I look around my office here, there's lots of things called plaques on the walls. I've got everything from CompTIA Security Plus, which I actually helped create, and there was a reason behind that, to my license to do technical handcuffing because I am a licensed security officer, personal executive protection officer in the state of Texas, and lots of others around the wall. So, got my ham radio license, got lots of things around. But let me tell you, Dave Dumas, who's a great mentor of mine and an employee of a certain company, he says it so well. He says, the value of certs, that if you spent that money or you spent somebody else's money or time, is to force you to keep training yourself. A cert is a moment in time. It's like an audit. It's a moment in time, folks. I got the certification and I got a certificate. It's a moment in time. If you're doing that for some, a long-term thing for somebody else, you're fooling yourself. We created Security Plus for that 2-year new person coming in, get your feet wet, get understanding. But we were there to teach people, not give them a certificate on the wall. And so I'm proud of people that do that. But what I want people to do is I want them to continue. I didn't trademark this, but let me tell you what I've done. Now, I got a lot of them. I'm privileged to have that. I've got licenses. I do things around, for example, I've been doing a lot of things around as a first responder in Texas. So I have a wildland firefighter certification. I'm actually a wildland firefighter. Okay. And I got a Security Plus on the wall. Okay. Does that just whack people out? That's a diversity. But let me tell you what happened there. What happens there is that I took a couple of years ago and I created what I call a resume bucket list. And what it is it's in my mind is I go down and I say, what do I want my resume to look like in 2 years? And what do I want to challenge myself to learn? Now, that might be a cert, maybe just a class, it may be a license, it may be something that a volunteer type of situation. What do you want to put on your resume for you? For you in the mirror that says, I'm going to keep pushing myself. Folks, if cert is what you're looking for. Now, again, when I'm doing hiring and things like that, I've had people that have CISSP and PhDs that cannot answer my famous question. It might probably doesn't remember my famous question. My famous question that I ask in every technical interview is, describe the OSI model. I love that. Okay. And it's not to trick people, folks. It's to wonder, did they keep learning? God, they got this great resume. Did they keep learning? Folks, I want you to keep learning. It's not about the cert. Certs are very powerful. They push you. They add into your different areas. But if you look at the variety of certs that I did, and I would say that, it's kind of like having somebody saying, I want to go get one of the ones that Mike just mentioned on ethical hacking and things like that, and on things like that. Why don't you combine that with a PMP or a Toastmasters? Why? Because now you can project manage a ethical hacking program. Now you can do Toastmasters for presentation skills. My son is Asperger's also, Mike, so I get it. And so it's those other skills. Create you a resume bucket list. If you get nothing out of me today, go create your resume bucket list, 1 to 2 years, 10 to 15 different things. I don't care if it's a 4-hour thing or a full license and certification. Please go do that.
Yeah, absolutely. The certs that I have are pretty diverse too. The CEH, ECSA, GCIH, GHTQ, GHD, and then I have of course, a ham license as well. That was one of my big things I got into when I was in the military was radio and RF, which I think people don't give enough thought about when it comes to compromise and data exfiltration is RF, and I'm trying to push that vocally through the industry because there's so many things with RF that you can do. So I'm gonna take this a little different direction now. Jim, I really appreciate it, and please stay on. We have a second guest, Kee Jeffery, who's a CTO
awesome.
Of a blockchain company, and I want to introduce him and give him a chance to give us his background, and we'll just have a roundtable discussion. So, Kee, why don't you tell the listeners who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Yeah, hey guys, good to be here. I'm from Australia, as you can maybe hear in my accent. It's a little bit earlier than I think for the rest of y'all here. I work at Oxen, which is the company that develops Session and Lokinet, which are both onion routing protocols / end-to-end encrypted messengers. So yeah, a bit of a different background from you guys because most of you guys would be from the cybersecurity world. But yeah, excited to be here and definitely vibing off some of the things that you guys were talking about before.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I started getting into cryptocurrencies not too long ago, messing with Monero and a couple other cryptocurrencies. What got you into the business? You say it's not cybersecurity, but I think there's a level of cybersecurity that goes into blockchain, especially when you talk about the onion protocol and that type of routing. Definitely a level of security that goes into that. So why don't you explain to us a little bit about what you do on a daily basis and how you work with the blockchain? Yeah,
so like a little bit about my background. I actually studied computer science, but with a major in cybersecurity in university, but dropped out halfway through to start a blockchain company when I was 21. So that was a really fun kind of getting to merge those two worlds together because I was really interested in the kind of academic side of things, like building new protocols, preserving people's security or privacy more online, and then getting to apply that to the blockchain world, which at that point in 2018, we'd just been through the kind of one of the worst crashes. I think we're going through one now as well in cryptocurrency, but building a company in the middle of a bear market was really fun as well, and raising money too for investors to build that company out was also good. In the blockchain world, like we really focus, or we tend to focus on the privacy front of things. So there's cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum that tend to have this open ledger where all of the transactions are sent between each other and you can see all of the links between the different accounts. When you look at some of these private blockchains like Monero or Zcash, the sending of amounts to different addresses is actually obfuscated. So that's the most kind of major difference on the blockchain front. And we've kind of harnessed that to build networks on top of the blockchain as well, which provide different services too.
Yeah, that's very cool. Actually, the cryptocurrency that I was messing with was Monero, strictly because of the extra level of I guess privacy when it comes to transactions with Monero. Ashley, I know that you have a couple of questions for Kee.
Yes. Well, I know you talked about, actually, you kind of went over my first question. So, second one I had was, do you think that eventually we're going to get away from, like country-specific currency and kind of rely solely on cryptocurrency?
This is an interesting question because there's been a lot of development around the kind of central bank issued coins. They haven't really started showing up much in the mainstream yet, but I know the Australian Central Bank, the Reserve Bank here, is working on a centrally issued digital coin, and I think the US might be working on one as well. And I think that offers a lot of advantages to central banks as well, because right now the system is very fractured. Like you have the kind of central bank, and then you have these like private banking institutions that hold most of the people's money. And if the bank wants to bring all of that data together about how money is moving around the system, they have to talk to a lot of different parties. And also when you look at something like taxation as well, it's hard to like kind of track down everyone's account and monitor money as it moves through the system when you've got this really fractured kind of internet of money. If you just have one central currency that you issue and all of the transactions are viewable by you, then you can start imposing like kind of transactional taxes or working out where people's money is stored, and it can never kind of leave the system as well. So I think that's the motivation for kind of central bankers. And I think we're going to start seeing it more and more in the next couple of years. You'll start seeing digitally issued currencies. And it might not be that the end user is actually using the central bank currency, but it might be that the private banks are onboarded first. So the way that the central bank issues their money to the private banks is through this digitalized blockchain currency, and then the users just interact with their bank normally, and that'll like filter down over the coming years to the user actually maybe having a wallet on their side where they receive some of this digital currency from a central.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk. 1 second, actually. It's really interesting that you talk about the exchanges of transactions and trying to keep your purchases and your activity kind of private. And the reason why I wanted to jump in really quick, the exposure I got to crypto was kind of forced. I'm not allowed to get a bank account in the US because I'm on some kind of list, DHS list, I guess. So I bank through an online service and use a cryptocurrency. So when I get deposits in that said service, it immediately gets transferred to crypto. That way, if the government tries to shut down my account, they can't touch the crypto. So I think that's a strong point to make when it comes to countries having too much access to people's money and transactions and too much information. I think cryptocurrency is going to be the next solution, because the dollar, as we all know, they print money like crazy, and really the money that they print doesn't have any kind of financial worth, to be honest with you. And with cryptocurrency is a little bit different, and I like the privacy of it. So yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
I was just gonna ask, when you're talking about wallets, so I don't really have a whole lot of knowledge on cryptocurrency. Like I have a little bit here and there. but the knowledge just isn't there. But as far as protecting cryptocurrency, what would you suggest to people that are new to crypto like I am, just for making sure that it's all secure? Because I have like different apps and whatnot, different accounts. Yeah, how do you just secure it, I guess, or make sure that it's all protected?
I think it depends how far you kind of want to get into it. I think one of the like easiest and safest ways to store crypto or large amounts of crypto if you're a consumer is a hardware wallet. I've got one on my desk here, which is essentially it's like a hardware kind of security device that has a little secure enclave on it, which stores your keys on it, and you connect it to your computer. And it's it's distant enough from your computer that it's much harder to hack than something that's always online and that you're downloading, weird software on and stuff. So that's generally how I would say you should deal with your keys if you're kind of storing, more and more money. But if you're just playing around with crypto and it's, $100, $200, then, downloading one of the wallets that's on your phone or on your desktop, your threat security model is a lot different from someone who's storing, hundreds of thousands of dollars and wants that extra security of a hardware device. And at this point, all of the exchanges also offer like pretty good, second factor authentication options. So storing on an exchange isn't that bad of an option if you're just storing kind of low amounts of money, like Coinbase or whatever exchange you use.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Kim has a question. With big banking and countries implementing policies, what do you think the next biggest challenge you see for privacy?
Well, the biggest kind of trend that I see emerging is this kind of privacy in name only trend. A lot of people are kind of capitalizing on this idea that privacy is a hot trend right now, and people want more privacy, but they don't really know what they're getting when that company sells them privacy. For example, I think Apple is going down a good route right now, like trying to offer more privacy to their users. But the reality is like they still want to be able to access everything in your iCloud, for example. Like it's, and I think this is going to happen in banking as well. Like, people will be talking about privacy more. They'll be telling you that, their institutions are private and, we've never been hacked or whatever. But I think it's really kind of a marketing tool at this point, like to start selling things to people. And I worry that kind of extends further and further. And we start seeing people thinking that they're private, even though they've just kind of been sold this idea of privacy.
Very cool. So Tanisha has a question. She says, so what are your thoughts about the return of currency for the recent Colonial pipeline hack? I've heard tell some folks think the government has access. Do you have faith that your funds are protected? Good question.
Yeah, so I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding about what actually happened there. That was just from my understanding of reading into it. I think it was the FBI has just been able to seize some hackers' wallets that were, the funds of a ransomware attack. They didn't hack Bitcoin or anything like that. They didn't break the cryptography involved in Bitcoin. I think they just got access to a VPS that was hosting a Bitcoin wallet, and the keys were stored unsecured on that VPS. So it's not so much a hack of Bitcoin as more it is just kind of, the FBI getting access to some hacker's wallet and then, repossessing that Bitcoin and then going through the process of, selling that Bitcoin so that the state can be funded, just as they would do if they had seized money from a drug dealer, for example, or cash,
And it's interesting too, because, the initial thought and word was that they had hacked the cryptocurrency. I don't know if you guys remember, but when the terrorist cell phone in California were obtained, the FBI couldn't even break into an iPhone. So them being able to break into a cryptocurrency is probably really far-fetched. So we have another question from Mohammed. He says, do you see corporate organizations wanting to transact through cryptocurrency?
I think actually it's going to be, I think it's right now at a very low level in terms of like corporates actually wanting to use cryptocurrency for remittance, but I think it's going to get bigger and bigger. And I think the reason for that is because the corporate kind of money moving structures are very kind of solidified and ossified. And I don't think like there's a lot of process around how you transfer money to a company, what the procedures around that are. But when you look at some of the advantages of a stable coin, which is a coin that's kind of tied to the value of the US dollar, like USDC or USDT, being able to send money within, 10 minutes to someone anywhere in the world, and you don't have to, if you've ever tried to send money overseas to like, Russia or like some kind of semi-failed state, like your bank gets on you immediately and asks you all these questions like, why are you sending money here? Like, what's the purpose of this transaction? With USDC and USDT, you just know their Ethereum address and you send it, and then they receive it 14 minutes later. So it does solve a lot of the issue. Like it creates its own issues because there's less compliance around it, but it also solves its issues, and it's faster and cheaper to use as well. So I think it will become a thing for corporates. It's just going to be in which use cases it's used, because it does make sense to have protocols around moving large amounts of money so that the company is protected from losses essentially.
Yeah, I think after the Colonial pipeline hack, there was, I say hack, it wasn't really a hack, but after the Colonial pipeline issue, the US government made a statement that I thought was really interesting about immediately they wanted to point out that it was a cryptocurrency that was obtained. And the fact that they pointed out that, hackers and dark web focus on cryptocurrency as a way to transact, I think it was a bad move on their part. It gives cryptocurrency in that market a black eye. And traditionally, it has been known to be the staple of transactions for the dark web, but that's changing pretty fast. It's more accepted, but you still have the archaic thinkers, like some people in the U.S. government, that believe that it's a nefarious way of making transactions, and it may be. It keeps me from having to pay a lot of taxes and a lot of other issues, but I really think that cryptocurrency should be a staple before too long. If you look at the IRS and the Federal Reserve and the private organizations that control those, I don't really trust that. I trust the blockchain a lot more than I would trust the Federal Reserve or the IRS. And I'm probably going to land on another list because of making that statement, but it's the honest truth. And so we have any other questions. Ashley, do you have any more questions for Kee?
No, those were my big ones. So you've kind of gone over everything else.
So if someone was going to get into cryptocurrency and create their own currency, I've actually been tossing around the idea of creating a token that sits on top of one of the blockchains. What would be the best way to go about that? And what kind of advice do you have for anybody wanting to create their own token?
So it really kind of depends how far you want to go down that route. I think that one of the easiest ways right now, and has been for the last couple of years, is to use the ERC20 standard, which is essentially a token on top of Ethereum, which is the second biggest kind of blockchain network out there. And that will give you a fair amount of control about, how that token is used and what kind of smart contracts that token can interact with. And when you create an ERC20 token, you also get access to all of the other applications that have been built on top of Ethereum as well. So you instantly get an exchange, for example, called Uniswap, which allows you to swap between different tokens. If you want to build something more custom, then you're actually looking at running your own blockchain. And that becomes a lot more complicated a lot more quickly, because you're going to need to look at actually forking something like Bitcoin or forking something like Monero. An existing project is probably a good place to start, but that means you also need to build this network of nodes that's around the world, and potentially miners or validators who are producing blocks on your network. So yeah, the simple way to do it, if you don't want to get too involved, is to mint an ERC20 token, which is pretty easy. There's online tools which will allow you to do that now, and you set your supply and you set how many are created, and Yeah, that's pretty easy process at this point. So, and yeah, you get to buy into the Ethereum ecosystem as well. So you get all of their wallets, you get their exchanges, you get the network effect that they've already built.
Cool. Yeah, I may be rattling your chain for some help in that area. I'm pretty new to crypto, and I want to create a token for the Haunted Hacker group. Specifically, I think that'd be really cool. I did work for a company in Scotland called Zortrex. They were a tokenization company, privacy advocates. But it was weird because their stuff resided on AWS, and the platform was kind of strange. But there's a lot of companies popping up all over the place that are trying to get into the privacy and tokenization and cryptocurrencies. One challenge that I'm kind of curious about that I've ran into is computing power, right? So when I'm mining for Bitcoin, I did a little project with Raspberry Pis, but as you know, like if you're mining with a Raspberry Pi, you may be dead before you get a full token or a full coin. So yeah, do you see that process being any easier in the future or less intrusive? Because I think Elon Musk made a point when he said he was going to start allowing Bitcoin with Tesla again if they started using clean energy. Because for those who mine Bitcoin, we all know that you probably spend more on electricity than you actually make mining the Bitcoin. So do you see that process getting any better or any easier, streamlined? What?
It depends. For Bitcoin, frankly, the answer is no, because Bitcoin's built around this model of proof of work, which is this idea that you can spend computational power to generate new coins. And because Bitcoin has become so valuable now, the entire operation has moved to places where it's very energy efficient and where miners can build economies of scale. And also, they're not mining on your traditional kind of computational hardware. They're using special chips called ASICs, which are designed around the SHA-256 hashing process. The chip is actually designed around the algorithm. So it only has one purpose, which is to mine Bitcoin, these machines that these miners buy. And they're operating off electricity that's like 1 cent per kilowatt, like just ridiculous pricing that you'll never be able to achieve. So for Bitcoin, no, like if you want to get into that space, you're really going to have to run a commercial mining operation or find a niche where you can get access to really cheap electricity or free electricity, potentially if you have renewables. And then it starts to make sense. But even then, you're committing to mining hardware which goes out of date after a couple of years. So if you're not pushing the max kind of volume out of it, it becomes annoying as well. Like if you live in a hot climate, for example, that's not a good place to mine, because the cheaper you can passively cool your miners, the cheaper it's going to be to continue to mine. If they're getting too hot, then they have to throttle themselves. Most of the cryptocurrency world is now moving towards a model called proof of stake, which is instead of you committing computational resources to the network and using that to mine, you actually buy coins and commit those to the network. And by holding those coins, you earn additional coins. And usually there is some kind of validator process as well, where you have to be online and you have to sign a number of blocks and send them to the network, or create new blocks and send them to the network. But the good thing about that is that that process is a lot cheaper. You don't actually need this like high level of computational resources. You can just run off a Raspberry Pi or a VPS hosted on the internet. And as long as you have those coins committed there, you're keeping the network secure. So I think what you're going to see in the next couple of years is a big move towards proof of stake. Ethereum's already going there. There's quite a few other coins that are moving towards proof of stake. Bitcoin will stay a monolith, I think, and its production of coins is not going to be controlled by some sort of committee which is saying that we should use more or less renewable energy. It's going to be controlled by whatever the cheapest electricity source is. And if that happens to be renewable energy, then miners will use renewable energy, and we do see that a lot in Nordic countries as well, where they're setting up around geothermal. But yeah, it's a complex kind of moving process, but I think that's a little bit of a snapshot there.
ahead, Jim. Jim had a question or an explanation about the comment about corporate use. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is going on in corporate, I'm not just talking about my employer, but around the corporate worlds that I get to play in. One is Bitcoin is blockchain is much more involved around, particularly around supply chain. I do a lot of work around supply chain fraud and supply chain security, and I can tell you that there's so many issues around supply chain. And forget about the stuff that's going on right now. I'm talking about the last 4 or 5 years. And so I tell you that if you are interested in the blockchain side, there's a huge, I think, opportunity for blockchain in the supply chain world. Obviously, there's a security mindset around that, but there's just a big need in that area. If you look at something like an Amazon or a Walmart in their warehouses. Now, my son sells on Walmart. He's a warehouse part of the Walmart program. And they've tried it. They've tried RFID. They've tried a lot of things. And so it's a big area. If you think about kind of what your resume bucket list is supply chain and blockchain. But on the corporate side, and this sounds funny, and this is not meant to degrade anybody, but right now, cryptocurrency, the average person that's sitting in a finance department in a corporation, no clue. They're not training on it in CPA school, all due respect to CPAs. So yeah, it sounds funny, but until we get the stuff into CPA 101, Finance 101, those early on, it's going to be harder for corporate because they want to do what they've done all along. I'm not saying it's the best way for the future and security and stuff like that, but just understand, my son getting a payment for doing some work for an Amazon seller, you know what? He's 3 people in his little company, little LLC. QuickBooks ain't supporting cryptocurrency right now. So it's that adoption at very early on. And it kind of sounds strange, but until the high school classes and the first year college finance classes start to talk about this, it's going to be hard to get it into a corporate world. Just a perspective, Mike.
Absolutely. And I think Key is definitely an exception to what I see in the commercial world. A young kid that gets into crypto and starts his own venture is very rare. I think I've only ran into a couple guys that have been successful at doing that. I do have one question though. So Elon Musk and his influence in the crypto world, cryptocurrency world, to me, it's a little frustrating. And I've been watching kind of like the market volatility, and really it rides on his comments. And when he decides to pump the currency, he'll dump a bunch of money, and all of a sudden, the specific cryptocurrency goes up. So it seems to ride on his back quite a bit. What are your thoughts with that, Key?
Yeah, I mean, I have been frustrated with it a little bit over the past couple of months as well. I think from looking at it, it's kind of clear that he doesn't really know what he's talking about when he makes these tweets. I mean, it's no kind of dissuasion to him tweeting. He can do whatever he wants, and I'm more than happy to read his tweets. And I think, over time, you're seeing him start to get a bit more involved in some of these projects as well. And I think he's tweeting less now as well, which is making me view the situation a little bit better. But yeah, I think it's really kind of representative of a very nascent market when like the opinion of one person can cause, 20% rises or 20% falls in certain coins, like and even the biggest coins out there, Bitcoin, are subject to what he's writing on Twitter. So yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. I don't think we've ever had kind of a someone who moves the market as much as him. So it's a new perspective, I think, to take in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's been a little bit more sheltered when it comes to tweeting. He had a volley between himself and Anonymous at one point, and that was a really bad move on his part. But yeah, I think that he's starting to see the volatility of the market, and it's not going to help the cryptocurrencies that he backs if he continues to manipulate the market like that. And I think that's
I mean,
go ahead.
there's a place for everyone to kind of just have fun. And I think that's more what his Twitter is. I don't think it's supposed to be taken super seriously. But it does end up going that way. Like, people do take it seriously because he's one of the kind of most enigmatic CEOs out there of a tech company or multiple tech companies. So yeah, I think people maybe need to take what he's saying a bit less seriously, because, you know, he's talking about Dogecoin and you know, posting lots of memes on his Twitter. So, you know, maybe just take it more in a lighthearted way rather than kind of a super serious message that he's putting out.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. My first introduction to Dogecoin was looking at something on the internet with Snoop Dogg, and I thought, wow, okay, so now we have a cryptocurrency with Snoop. That's really impressive, kind of depressive too. But anyways, yeah, it's an interesting market for sure. Something that I've always been interested in, but just never really touched until the U.S. traditional banking decided to exile me. So now I've been looking at different ways to, you know, handle money and different organizations to go through. And it's funny you mentioned like the temperature for mining. So I know that there's one place in, I want to say it's Greenland, maybe it's Iceland, super cold, underground, basically inside of a mountain, and it's like cold vault storage. And I think that's probably the best place to mine. I also had another idea too. You know, I knew how hard it was to mine, you know, different cryptocurrencies and how long it took. So I made this arcade with a Raspberry Pi, and I thought, you know, I could probably toss a mining script on every one that I make and sell those. So when they crank them up, they're automatically, you know, mining for Bitcoin, and you're not going to see a fluctuation in the process of the arcade games on that Raspberry Pi because it takes little to no processing power for those. And then in oil and gas, I did a lot of like security and defense in oil and gas. And what I found was the browser plugins for the crypto miners are very intrusive. And it's really easy to pick up which ones have the browser plugin miners, because you walk by a laptop and it sounds like it's taking off like a jet engine. But it's pretty popular. You see them everywhere. Every time that I've looked at an affected device or a device that I had maybe like some security issues or concerns with, there was always miners on it. So someone out there is making a lot of money. And when we look at the political situation, every time that we put sanctions on North Korea or we put sanctions on Iran, what's the first thing they do? They go out and try to like break into people's Bitcoin wallets, you know, try to mine for Bitcoin. And I think that's going to be the environment that we're in now. I don't think that's going to go away for a long time, especially, you know, with the tensions globally right now. No more questions. Do you have any questions for us, Kee or Jim? You know, I know that Ryan talked to you, Kee, about the group and what we do, and you know, anything like that. Do you have any questions for the crew that we can answer and kind of give you some insight as to what we do?
There was something that I just wanted to talk about with you, where you were talking about how kind of, yeah, there's these new attacks where people will install software that starts mining on, you know, either a large kind of corporate network or individual devices. Often, and it's interesting actually, often what they're mining there is Monero. And the reason that they mine Monero is not so much because of the privacy aspects of Monero, but because Monero employs a different type of hashing algorithm, which is very optimized for kind of consumer level CPU kind of devices, or devices that would hold consumer level CPUs. With Bitcoin mining, because it is such a specific process, it means that, and there's all of these ASIC chips out there that are designed for it. It means that if you take traditional hardware and put that on the Bitcoin mining network, that it will be much less efficient than the existing miners out there. So yeah, you'll see oftentimes that these attackers are mining kind of fringe cryptocurrencies or cryptocurrencies that use kind of optimized hashing algorithms for consumer level devices. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, there's actually some Raspberry Pi scripts, and there's a couple OSs built just for mining crypto, and most of those fall within like Ethereum and Monero. I'm using one right now that mines for Monero, and literally it's just a script. And to download the blockchain to start, you know, the actual mining, it took probably half the time than a Bitcoin miner would take. It literally was like super fast. So yeah, like I mean, that aspects are getting a lot better. But everybody wants that Bitcoin because of the value of the Bitcoin, was so high at one point. I knew people who cashed in a couple of Bitcoins and bought a house or, retired, so that possibility is there. But right now we're at an interesting place where, the volatility of the market took it down a little bit. And I think right now is probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but right now would probably be a better time to start mining than, let's say, 5 years ago. Because I think that we're about to see an influx.
It's always tricky. I wouldn't, if you want to invest in cryptocurrencies, I wouldn't suggest mining, just because you've got a lot of competition against people who are in much cheaper places to get their electricity. If you want to kind of invest, I think the easiest way is just to buy and hold coins. But it's also, you get a lot of technical knowledge as well from mining. So if you're looking for a pursuit of something that you want to do for fun, mining actually is a really fun thing to do, like with your friends and family. And, you can physically see the device moving along and how much progress it's making as well, which I think kind of helps people understand how these cryptocurrencies work. I did have a question there. Maybe, I guess this is for everyone who can talk. I think, like, now that I'm starting to deal more with hiring people, and I have been for the past couple of years, I don't really look at certifications at all. And maybe that's because I work more for a tech company and we don't really kind of do cybersecurity as much. But really what I'm looking for now is kind of active GitHub profiles, projects that they've worked on that they can show me the source code for and that I can analyze. And projects that I can use, like, kind of just, 5-minute tools or something that someone's created as a weekend project that I can kind of interact with. I find that the certification stuff is a little bit hard to understand what goes into that certification or what that actually means and how easy it was to pass. So I tend to try and look for kind of projects that people have built in their personal time. Is that an approach that is being taken more and more by kind of hiring in the cybersecurity world, or how do you see it?
Well, from my point of view, that's kind of what I've been doing for the past 10 years. It's, HR requires a certain level of certification, but to me, once I get past that HR initial screen, it's less for me the cert, and it's more creative thinking, the thought process, the hands-on. I'll usually create like a couple vulnerable machines and give them a couple hours to test those machines, and then take the results and be able to articulate what they found and how they found it. To me, that shows a process. It shows a thinking method, and it helps me understand, their troubleshooting skills as well as their creativity level. And I think creativity is a big factor. What I found with, especially pen testers, is most of them, if not all of them, have some sort of creative hobby, whether it be music, whether it be art, drawing, acting, whatever. They're always involved with some kind of creative process, because with pen testing, you have to be creative. And so when I look at a network, before I even start pen testing, I have a visual image in my head of where I need to go through that network and how to get to a certain device and what traffic I'm seeing. I try to visualize all that because I'm a visual learner. Really, people with Asperger's probably have the most trouble, or should have the most trouble, when it comes to pen testing, because we're very black and white. But what I'm finding is we're able to visualize the network easily in our head. We may not be able to articulate it to you, but I can show you. I can show you how to do it. And to me, that's more important than any cert. It's a thought process. Anybody can take a test. And I don't slight people who fail certification tests, because I'm not a good test taker. And that, like Jim said, it's a snapshot in time. And not all people learn the same way. What do you think, Jim?
Key, I think that what one of the things when I do interviews, and I've of course interviewed for a long time as a supervisor and a manager, is almost 100% of the questions that I ask, and it may sound simple and easy, but give me an example of, and some skill or thing that I do, soft skill, hard skill, or something. Give me an example of, and I'll tell you, probably 75% of the answers that I get out of those questions are how they would do it. And what that tells me is not that they don't know how, but they're not listening. And it sounds simple, but give me an example of a time you had to rebuild a server. and under an outage or something like that. And so I'm looking for, because here's what I tell people in an interview standpoint is, do not tell me what you know. Tell me what you have done. Then I will know what you know. Remember, the interviewer is smarter than you usually. They may not have a different perspective that you do, but they generally already know the answers to the questions. So that's why the questions are very important. What I look for from a certification, what I'm looking for, it is not a skill set. I'm looking for somebody that's ongoing educating themselves. They're continuing to force themselves. I want somebody with a resume bucket list or a training plan in their program where 75% of the training and certification or licenses or whatever they're doing to better themselves is paid for by them. If your boss, as I say, if your boss isn't budgeting for your ongoing training, that's not his fault. That's your fault. Dave Ramsey, every dollar has a name. Okay. When you're doing your budget at the beginning of the year, you should have training and certifications and resume bucket list, whatever you want to call that term. And so that's what I'm looking for. Key is, give me some examples of what you're doing. The certifications are proof to me. It proves to me, look, now if I see somebody did a certification 10 years ago, big whoop-de-doo. Doesn't show me an ongoing. If you look at mine, because I practice what I preach, you're going to see 1999, 1999, 1988, 2000, 2002, 2004. You're going to see ongoing things, and it's a broadening of my knowledge that goes on. So, Key, that's just my thoughts on that question.
Another good point too, Key, is when you talk about GitHub and projects, we have a lot of newcomers that come into the Haunted crew, people who can't really afford, let's say, going to take a certification exam, or just still in school and they're trying to budget and they just really can't do it. So what I explain to them is that show your work, do a GitHub, start a project, publish that project, do updates, to build a blog, show people that you're actually doing something in the community, find a passion and go for it. Because to me, I think that speaks a lot louder than, a test. The fact that you're already contributing and you can prove yourself. To me, circumstances are different for everybody, and certification processes are different for everybody. They definitely hold a place in the industry. I'm hoping that certification industry can change, and I'm hoping that we have an impact on that. Because I think that more people need to have the capability to take those exams. The people who come from diverse communities, from poor areas in the country, that are really aspiring to be something. They shouldn't be rejected because they can't afford to take a certification exam. We have somebody online with us right now, Tanisha, comes from Black Girls Hack. She's a founder of Black Girls Hack, and she mentors a lot of kids that probably have that same issue, where they may not have all the opportunities that other people have, but they shouldn't be, I guess, rejected because of that. To me, that drive and the willingness to go and do research and work for free shows me that even though they don't have a certification, there's probably a reason behind that, and that reason is probably because they come from an area they can't afford it. But it doesn't make them less intelligent or less go-getters. So I applaud Tanisha for her work. She's been on the show a couple times, and she's a really great girl. And if you get a chance to check out Black Girls Hack, outstanding group. And what else do we have?
Now, what I will say also is that I've also seen people do the GitHub idea, and Mike's got a great point. I've used it many times, but it's also funny when you see do your due diligence, and when they don't give credit to the developer, or they've taken and maybe plagiarized a little bit too much of somebody else's code, that should also be a clue. We've actually had some people show up with, wait a minute, I know that code. Wait a minute, you didn't write that. So I hate to say a negative side of that, but I always do your due diligence on that example. But Mike makes a great point across the board is absolutely, we are blessed in many of the countries we all live in, but that should not be the only basis of how we hire.
Exactly. And with that, guys, I want to thank you guys for coming on the show. This has probably been one of my favorite shows so far. And I want to thank Google Fi for actually producing a signal that doesn't drop me every 10 seconds. And the story behind that is, so we had an ISP called Nomad. I'm sure, Jim, that you've heard about Nomad. They actually use SIMs. It's an LTE provider, and they actually use SIMs from like AT&T and Verizon. And up here on this mountain, I can't get any kind of connection. Like I get kicked off every 10 seconds almost. But we went to Google Fi. Google Fi still uses the same thing. It uses LTE connections and towers from like, I want to say US Wireless, as well as T-Mobile and some other like legacy, what's left of the Sprint network. So yeah, I applaud Google Fi for the connection, and Nomad Internet, you're on the way out the door. But I want to thank you guys for coming on. It means a lot to me to have Jim on. It's good to see you're doing well, and you're welcome anytime back on the podcast as a co-host, or if you want to be a guest again, or if you have people that you want to get exposure into the cybersecurity world, I'd be more than happy to interview them. And Kee, I really appreciate it. I'm sorry we didn't catch up the last time. But I definitely appreciate you being here, and just the same, you're welcome anytime you want, and participate if you want with the Discord or whatever you want. And Ashley, thanks again for volunteering to co-host, or being voluntold. You're in the Navy, you should expect that. And you did a great job. So with that, I'm going to close it down, and I will see you guys next weekend, and be safe and stay strong. Bye, guys.
Great. Thanks, Mike.